Live. All right, we should be live. So, hopefully you can see me from here. All right, everyone, so we're here for the NaNoWriMo Writers Talk with the lovely Amy Schisler. Amy has been writing all of her life as an author and freelance writer. Her first children's book, Crabbing with Granddad, is an autobiographical work about spending a day harvesting the Maryland blue crab. Amy grew up here in southern Maryland and spent much of her childhood at her grandparents' house on the Wycomico River, the inspiration for Crabbing with Granddad, as well as her novel, The Devil's Fortune. Amy received her bachelor's degree from Salisbury University and graduated from the University of Maryland with a master's in library and information science. A former librarian and teacher, she now lives on the eastern shore of Maryland with her husband, daughters, and their family dogs. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for having me here today, Brianna.
Of course.
So, I'm excited to be here and talk to you all about writing, and hopefully everybody will take something home with you that you can use in the projects you're working on or getting started on. So we're going to talk today about authentic fiction and writing about what you know. And I will start real to them if it feels authentic. And it can only be real and authentic to them if it is first real and authentic to you. So it's really important that your books are true, not only in like a historical, factual kind of trueness, but also in emotions, in surroundings, in characterization. So we're going to look at all of those things today and talk about how you can make them real and true and have readers feel like they're actually a part of what's going on. And when I was writing several years ago, when I first started publishing, my best friend growing up was the maid of honor in my wedding, died of cancer. That was hard. What was harder was that she and I had become estranged from each other. And I was really struggling with this. And my aunt, who I'm very, very close to, was talking to me on the phone and helping me. And she said, you know, you're really lucky. You have an outlet for this because you can take everything that you're feeling right now and put it into something that you're writing. And that really hit me hard. And it's something that has stuck with me, that's not just the case for me. That's the case for everybody I know, that if I can pull things from my experience, from other people's experiences, from things I do, places I go, all of that will make my books more real for the reader. So those are the things we're going to talk about. So we are going to look at characters, settings, stories, and I have these broken down to, I'm going to give you some information on how to make these real, answer questions, and then I'm going to give you a writer's prompt. It's only going to be about 5 minutes, and we'll see what you all can come up with. And if you feel like sharing what you've written down, then we'll go ahead and share. And then we'll move on to the second one. We'll take a break in the middle if you want to go to the bathroom or grab a snack. I also have books in the back that if you're interested in any of my books, I'd be happy to sign those and sell those. And then we'll do the next two and have final questions. So just so you know what we're going to be doing today. So how is your writing going to be authentic? And I've talked about this a little bit, but before we get into each segment, these are the things you want to think about. Your personal experiences, what you have observed in your life and others, and exploration. These are the 3 ways to write with experience. And exploration has multiple different ways of looking at it. Exploration could mean something like travel. It could mean searching the internet. It could mean doing research, reading books. So there's a lot of different things that will pull that in. But these are really the 3 ways you can make a book real: personal experiences, observation, and exploration. So the first thing we're going to talk about are characters. You can base characters on yourself. You can base characters on people you know. Or you can base characters on tropes, which is done all the time. And we're going to talk about each of those. So basing a character on yourself, I will be honest and say that There's a little bit of me in all of my main characters. Not all me, because that would be completely boring for me and everyone else, but little things about myself, because isn't it, you're writing what you know? Don't you know yourself more than anyone? So it's little things like looks. And we want to go a little bit deeper too than just looks. And we'll talk about that. Your habits and your idiosyncrasies, work experience, personal experience, draw things from your own personal life. So let's go into each of these. So again, looks. You have blue eyes. You're not just going to write about and describe a character as having blue eyes. Do something about the eyes. You know, do they sparkle? Do they have flecks of green? Do they have something else? Helps your readers visualize the character. My eyes sometimes are brown and sometimes they're green. So they have somebody like that you can envision. You're never going to just say she has brown hair. Because very few people have just brown hair. There's something else about their hair. So you're painting a picture for people. And when you can paint a picture for them, that makes it more real, makes the person become alive. Habits and idiosyncrasies, we all have them. One of the characters in one of my books eats the same breakfast every morning. It's the same breakfast I eat every morning. And so it made it easy for me. Okay, she's the kind of person who needs to be really organized. She needs her day to start a certain way. And so that's just how this character is. So she's gonna eat the same breakfast every day. So you plug that in. There may be other habits like, biting your lip when you're nervous, twisting your hair. Those are things that people do. And so when your character does it, it makes your character, again, more realistic. Work experience. As Brianna said, I was a librarian for 15 years. I just last year wrote my first book about a librarian. Librarians don't just sit at the desk all day and check books in and out. There's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes. So I was able to take what I knew and show what this librarian does when she's not standing at the desk checking people's books out. So you want to use that and your own personal experiences. As I said, my friend who passed away, all of that pain was something that I could use. A death in the family. And it doesn't have to be just bad things, good things too, fun experiences that you've had that you can bring into your books. It's really the same with other people. So basing on people you know, almost all of my books have characters in it that are completely based on people I know. And they know that, and they like that, and it's fun for them to try to figure out who's who. Sometimes I use people's real names, and sometimes I don't. That's going to depend on your character. Sometimes you might not want to use someone's real name. You might not want them to know that it's based on them. So you want to look at looks and personalities of family and friends. Again, be careful. You don't want to describe someone in such a way that they know you're talking about them, and they don't like the way that you're characterizing them. Experiences that they have shared with you or that you've witnessed. Again, be careful with this. If it's something really intimate or really personal, be careful how you write about it, or at least talk to them about it. I had a friend who had breast cancer, and I remember her telling us a story of the day that the doctor told her she had cancer. She got very angry, and she said that she stood up and just pounded on his desk as hard as she could, screaming at him. And she said, "You just sat there, let her get it all out." And then when she sat back down and took a breath, they went on. And I thought, that is something really authentic, that somebody who has had cancer and has sat there and gotten that diagnosis would know and understand that the rest of the world might not. So to me, that was I have a book about a character who found out she has breast cancer. And I thought, that was a really important scene for me. Not only to write it and that you see that pain in her and you understand, but I wanted to get it right. So, of course, I sent it to my friend and said, is this right? And she was working with me, so she knew that I was going to be asking her questions. And that's important. When you're doing something that's really personal to someone, it's nice to have that person know and work with you and be willing to help you out with that. And then, of course, things about people that inspire you. Somebody is a great travel blogger, and you live vicariously through that person. Maybe you want to write a book about a travel blogger and take some of that person's experiences. So things that inspire you about somebody can also lead to really authentic characters. So if you're writing based on a real person that's not you, again, I just want to reiterate, let them know that you're using them or their experiences. Ask permission if it's something that's very private or upsetting. Ask them for more information. Ask them to open up to you and help you really develop this character. And then if you feel like it's something that's really deep or emotional, show it to them before it suddenly comes out in print. And then the last thing about characters is basing characters on tropes. We see it all the time. How many books are based on Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy? You have the original telling of Pride and Prejudice, and then you have 100 years later, there's a new telling of Pride and Prejudice, and then half the Hallmark movies, seriously, at least half of them are really based on Pride and Prejudice. It's the same storyline of the man and woman who hate each other, and then eventually realize they're in love. Done all the time. Film characters. How many medical drama shows have a Dr. Virginia? It might only be Grey's Anatomy that called him that, but isn't that character on every single one of those shows? And every book you read about doctors, most of those romance books about doctors, it's that doctor who's been with every nurse in the hospital. He's the playboy, he's the one everyone wants, he's the smartest one there. You just can't get it right in romance until the totally unexpected. And that could be romance, that could be crime, that could be espionage. There's always a corrupt politician somewhere. So those characters, you can create authentic characters because it's been done so many times. It's easy to figure out the characterization. But it's been done many times. It does work. So if that's where you're heading, it works. It has been done many times. Know the genre, whether it's going to be a romance or it's going to be an espionage or it's going to be a corrupt government kind of plot. Know the genre and make the character fit with that genre. Understand the character's motivation. That's harder to do when it's not you or someone you can talk to. So really understand what it is that makes the character that way so you can build that background for that character. Research the platform and the message, if it's a politician or somebody like that you want to know that it's going to ring true to your readers. Most importantly, if you do it this way, make it different. Base it on a trope, but make your story different than all the others. If you're going to have the guy and the girl that hate each other at first, don't let the whole thing read like the modern day Pride and Prejudice. Put some twists and some turns and some other things in there to make it your book. All right. So, any questions so far on authentic characterizations? Authentic characters. Then what we're going to do is you're going to have 5 minutes to create a character. So I want you to give us a description of the person and a brief background about that person, or write a scene that describes that person. And then again, if you want to read it out loud to us, that's up to you. It will let us see how you devise your character. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of an example of a way that you can describe a character in your book so that we can either visualize them, get to know them, and I'll tell you, it's often not the same thing. You're often not going to write a scene where you can both visualize the character and completely get to know that character in the same scene. You want to do one and then at some point do the other, because you want to build on that character and their background and all of that. Let's see. Anything good available? Joe smiled at Helena. The light blonde highlights against the darker strands of hair shone in the sunlight that streamed through the window, and her blue eyes, the same color as her sister's, sparkled with delight as she gazed up at him from behind the circulation counter. Normally, Joe preferred long hair on women, but Helena's short curls, twinkling eyes, and pale skin gave her the delightful appearance of a pixie, and often made Joe recall the class he suffered through as an undergrad, in which his eccentric professor made the students memorize Cornish poetry about the childlike, bubbly creatures. He saw Helena as both childlike and bubbly in the most complimentary way. Helena's blue dress and a favorite color of pixies added to the imagery, while her white cardigan made her appear both modest and beautiful. Joe admired how nice she looked with little makeup and only a small pair of sparkling blue studs in her ears. Yes, she was exactly what he pictured a pixie to look like. Gives you character description in a way that you can really visualize what she looks like. So now it is your turn. And something has happened to my timer. There we go. So you have 5 minutes to create a character or write a scene that describes your character. 1 minute left. Okay. Not easy to do in 5 minutes. Do any of you have anything that you wrote down that you want to share about a character you created or a scene you put together?
I have a appearance of a character here. So they've got long hair tied back roughly with rubber bands. Like you can poke it and it'll like shift a little bit. It doesn't move at all really. Gauze wrapped about their arms, almost like a preventative sort of thing. But you move it and there's like visible burns beneath the stained clothing. But the stains tend to overlap, so it doesn't even appear what original color some of them were. You know, looked like an animal sort of trapped, prodded towards a cliff, but still with this resolution to march on anyway.
Very good. Excellent. Let's kind of see where you're going with that character a little bit. Very nice. Anybody else want to share? You don't have to. Thank you very much, Nick. All right, so we're going to move on to authentic settings. So now you have your characters, and one thing that I always do, as I said earlier when Nick and I were chatting, I am what's called a pantser. So I don't do an outline. I don't plot everything out. Does anybody know who's considered like the ultimate pantser, or sorry, plotter, the ultimate plotter with her writings? I'll give you a hint. She wrote 7 novels about a teenage boy. J.K. Rowling. Yes. Who knew exactly what was going to happen in all 7 novels before she even wrote the first sentence of the first chapter. So I don't write that way, but what I do is I develop my characters. So I have pretty solid characters, their descriptions, their background, where they are when the novel starts, and where I want them to be when the novel ends. And then I let the characters take me through the story. And so this is where, as you're going and you're coming up with your settings, and then you're moving forward and writing scenes. You have to have a basis, whether you're a pantser, you have to have somewhere to start. You have to have, like mine is that characterization. For some people, it might be a particular place that they want to write about, or a particular incident, but you have to have that start to be able to build on. And if you're a plotter, you have to have that outline and know what the book is going to be about. None of that will work, again, if it's not authentic. So we're going to move from characters to places. You can use familiar places. You can use places you visited, or during the course of your writing, places that you may want to visit. Personally, I think that's really important, that you've been there or have the ability to go there. And it's not wrong to search online as well. Even if you've been somewhere, you don't know everything in one trip. So we're going to talk about some ways that you can do that. So familiar places, your childhood home. I don't know about any of you, but if I dream at night and I dream that I'm home, it doesn't matter if I'm married and I'm with my children, if I'm still a kid, if I'm old, no matter what, if the setting of my dream is home, it's the house that I grew up in until I was 15. That's where my brain goes. And my dreams are very real. Every detail of that house are there. So writing about your childhood home is something that everybody is intimately familiar with. You could write about your current or your former hometown. You could write about where you went to college, where you work. So places that are familiar with you. I don't know if any of you recognize the house here in this picture. It's down in 7th District. It is Ocean Hall. When I was a little girl and I was growing up and spending time with my grandparents, I watched this house being renovated. And I was always fascinated by it. And my mother and her siblings and my siblings and I, we always heard all these stories about the pirates that came into the house and all the hidden treasure they left and their secret passageways and ghost stories. And I thought, it would be really fun to set a book there. To spend an entire day with Dr. Boyd and his wife who owned and renovated the house, and they took me all through. And at one point, Dr. Boyd said, now I want you to know, all those rumors we all heard growing up as kids, none of them are true. No pirates, no treasure, no secret passageways. And I looked at him and said, maybe not in your house. But in my house, I can put whatever I want to. So that is where my book, The Devil's Fortune, came from, was based on the history and architecture of Ocean Hall. So I took something I was familiar with, a place that I was familiar with, and a process of that renovation that I witnessed, and then turned it into something really completely different for my book. So it's always nice when you have some place that you can base something on. Places that you have visited, or places you can visit. I have 4 books that take place on the island of Chincoteague in Virginia. And it's close, it's easy to get to. So I have spent a lot of time going back and forth. And when I do go places, I take notes. I take lots of pictures, lots of pictures. I have a whole file in my pictures of just Chincoteague pictures. So that if I'm writing a scene and I want to remember what does it look like when the sun rises over the ocean in that particular place, I can actually pull up the picture and I will write my scene based on what I'm seeing in that picture. Obviously, lots of pictures of the ponies, you know. So take pictures when you go so that when you're home and you're sitting at your desk and you're writing, you have something that you can refer to about certain scenes. Talk to the residents. If you go somewhere, talk to them. Ask them to share stories. Ask them to tell you things about the island or wherever, about their experiences there. Because those may be some of the same experiences some of your characters have. Eat local. Make note of the menus in the local fare. Take a picture with your phone of a menu at a restaurant that has maybe been there for 100 years and is the one that everybody goes to. And then you can talk about the local food that you had. And one thing that I like to do is visit, and I'm talking about this, visit places on the island, like museums or different things that you can learn and not just go there. I'm bringing this up a little bit early. Not just go to those places, talk to the people there. So that's why I said, talk to the ones who are there and let them tell you what it's like to live in that setting. So now you not only have a visual with the pictures you've taken, but you have actual information from the people who are there. And don't be afraid to search online. Let me go back a minute to visiting places. Several years ago, my husband and I were on vacation in Italy, and we were visiting a vineyard right outside of Verona. And this young man on the vineyard was so enthusiastic, so excited about this vineyard that had been in his family for generations. And they had this prize-winning wine, and he walked us all through the fields and showed us all the different grapes, and it's a blend of all these different grapes, and he told us about them, and took us into the winery and explained how the whole process of winemaking works, the barrels. About halfway through this tour, my husband leaned over and said, "You're reading a book right now." I said, "I am." He said, "I can see it." So as soon as we got back into the taxi, I started making my notes and wrote all the way back into Verona about that. And I took pictures while we were there, and all of that became my inspiration for Whispering Vines. This was my first book that really like broke through and got me a nice big readership. So, and it was really all because he inspired me, the place inspired me. And so I took pictures and I made notes. And I will say I had to visit a few more wineries to get that process down right. So sometimes when you're visiting these places, it can be, good on more than one level. So let's talk about searching online. And I'm just going to show you some examples. So you go to look at local newspapers. I found this website for Chincoteague, and it has all of the local newspapers that the Shore Daily News, farther down is the Salisbury Times, all the places that cover Chincoteague news. And that was extremely helpful to me to find out what goes on a regular basis and what the news items are. And in my Chincoteague books, one thing that the readers have really liked is at the beginning of each chapter, I give an excerpt from something. From one of them, it's from a book that one of the characters wrote. From another one, it's excerpts from a cookbook that one of the characters is working on. And the last one, it was excerpts from the island newspaper. And they weren't real excerpts, but they were things I found based on the news stories going on there. Let's see. Because taking me off that page. We're not done with it. Websites. I spend a lot of time on the Chincoteague website that tells me everything that's happening in the town, everything that's coming up. I spend a lot of time on the island event page on the internet, because my characters in the books, they don't just do things that have to do with what's going on in the books. In order to make them real, they do things like they attend the Blueberry Festival, which is really big on the island. One of my characters is an artist, so there's all kinds of art festivals, arts and crafts festivals. So she's always there at those festivals selling her artwork. Of course, the big Oyster Fest, one of the biggest things they do on Chincoteague. Chincoteague has the largest number of retired military of any place in the country, believe it or not. So Veterans Day is a huge deal in Chincoteague. So these are things that when you check these pages, you can find out. Also, the websites of the local organizations, museums. For Chincoteague, of course, the fire department's a big deal. But I spend a lot of time looking at these. That, by the way, is Misty, the real Misty of Chincoteague, because she lives on in the museum. And so I check these because they can give me more information that I can put into the book. And one of the things I have heard many times with my Chincoteague books from the locals is that they feel like the island is real in the books, that I go to real places, take the characters to real places and real events, and actually bring the real life of the town into the books. So that's another thing to think about when you're really trying to achieve authentic settings. One thing, let's see, it's not going to come back. There we go. One thing that you want to remember when you're doing your settings is show, don't tell. And I'm sure you've all probably read a novel that it goes on and on and on and on with some kind of a description or something. And it's just telling you about it instead of showing you about it. This again is where I think pictures come in really handy. Paint the scene through the eyes of the character. And if you do that, it'll also be seen through the eyes of the reader. Okay, so you're not just going to say, the sun set over the water, it was orange, the water was reflecting the rays, you're actually going to say, like, as she gazed across the open beach and into the ocean, she watched the sun as it slowly came up out of the waves. You kind of describe what it looked like as it was rising. And even more so, let them experience the scene. Because I don't know about you, but if I'm watching a sunrise, I'm not just sitting there watching a sunrise. It's doing something to you inside. So as she's watching the sun, she felt her heartbeat quicken just a little bit as she knew it was getting ready to pop up over the horizon. And she knew it was going to be a good day. Make it an experience. And that's how you show instead of just telling. Make the character, show the character's reactions, what they're feeling, what's going on with them at the time, and use your senses. Maybe a character watching the sun come up over the ocean is watching it from a balcony. She can smell the salt in the air, maybe even taste it on her lips. It's a little bit misty and she can taste it. She can smell the toast that's just popped up out of the toaster behind her, and she knows that means it's time to go in and finish getting ready. Use your senses in these authentic settings to be able to show the reader what is happening and bring the reader into the setting so that they are experiencing it as well. Questions about authentic settings, about any of that? We talked about hometown, or childhood home, places you visited, doing some research online. Any questions about any of that?
I do have one thing I can add, though. As far as the newspapers go, the library here does have access to all of the local newspaper records going back several decades. Pretty much anything that the newspapers have that they still have has been digitized, and you can access through the library. So.
There you go. Come right here and do your research. And I assume that you can still also access through Maryland Digital Library, the consortium. You can, if you're writing someplace about somewhere else, you can come here and find those newspapers. So if they're not online, and not all of the really small town newspapers are online, but a lot of them, they are in that consortium that they can pull up for you at the library. Never forget your library as a resource. All right, so this time you're gonna sketch out a setting. So it's not necessarily a scene. There's not necessarily things going on, except remember to put a character in your setting so that you can show the setting through the eyes of the character. So it doesn't have to be a big scene where there's lots of things going on, because what you're really concentrating on is the setting and how it's affecting your character. So, or the setting itself, how you want your reader to be able to visualize the setting. All right, and again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to go ahead and put together a setting. And hopefully these are things you can take with you and you can build on them with whatever your work in progress is. And I apologize, I should have read this to you before you started your prompt to give you an idea. I'm going to just read you a setting description. Let's see. Empty, dreary, sad, desolate, broken, depressing, unrecognizable, dying. Those were the words that tumbled through Andy's mind as she drove past the town's main square. The thought occurred to her that the words could be used to describe them both, Buffalo Springs and Andrea Nelson. What happened here? The town was always so vibrant, so alive with community pride. The last time she'd ridden down the street, it had been in a convertible, with confetti flying in the air and people cheering for her. For her. She just missed the thought of shedding tears as she remembered the way they hailed her as a hero. It was 2011, and Andy was among the last troops with John from Iraq. She had yet to tell her parents that she was only home for a short period of time and would be taking a position with the elite Navy SEALs. The entire town had turned out to welcome her home. Though she had taken course after course of military history and served time in Afghanistan and Iraq, she was still naive enough to believe that the good guys always won. And she let herself think that she was special, above the crowd, in the know, and willing to defend her country at all costs. Now she knew the truth. She was a failure, and those costs were a price too high to pay or repay. And from the looks of things in town, the disease that rotted inside her mind and heart was contagious, and she had brought it home with her. Andy shook her head as her gaze wandered around. Almost all the storefronts were empty. Windows were smashed. The sidewalk was cracked and broken, and the beautiful fountain in the center of the square that represented the many springs around the Buffalo River watershed was dry. The once thriving community was little more than a ghost town of empty buildings with red bricks and pink-peeling siding. When Andy pulled up in front of the white two-story house on one of the side streets, she realized that the sickness had spread there too. The house was in desperate need of paint. The front porch railing was falling apart, and the screen door had been patched in several places. But the fall foliage in her mother's exquisite gardens brought a rainbow of color to the street. And Andy couldn't help feel like Dorothy, emerging from the black and white surroundings of Kansas into the technicolor hues of Munchkinland and its yellow brick road. That was a scene that not only described the scene, but told you what the character was feeling, what she was going through, and how she related to the scene. So I apologize for not reading that beforehand, giving you an idea. Did anyone write down a scene that not a scene, but a setting that they would like to describe or read to us?
I kind of wrote about, I used to teach piano, so like, you know, about this partnership, and there's a couple students there, and they're all sitting at their pianos, and they're plugged in with their headphones, and just talking away, and the silent kind of always really sound, it just keeps going, but no sound to see, plugged in with their headphones. They kind of self-occupied, you got a minute to set up, do the person on the push-up, so you just can't mess with it.
That's a great setting, and a great way to describe the scene. I love how you said the hollow sound of just the keys being pushed, because you can imagine that, being a room full of people playing the piano and not hearing the sound. That's really nice, thank you. Very good. All right, so now I will give you all time if you want to get a snack, if you want to get something to drink, go to the bathroom, stretch. So we're about halfway through.
It's the bathrooms and the water fountains are just around the corner to the left.
I did have a timer on here, it's disappeared. I said about 15 minutes, but we don't need 15 minutes. If you all need to go to the bathroom and stretch and come back and you're ready to keep going, we can keep going. So, up to you all. Nobody needs a break? Okay then. That's fine, we will keep right on going. Okay. So now we're going to go into authentic stories. So we've talked about the characters. We've talked about the setting. Now we're going to bring them together. Okay. So the scene that I read really is kind of, it's starting to bring them together. What is this story going to be about? And the setting description that I read really tells you what the story is going to be about. The town is dying. Andy is dying. It's going to go forward from there. She needs to find a way to live, a reason to live, and the town needs a reason to live. So that's where it's going to progress. So now we're going to go into that, taking your characters, taking your settings, and putting them together in an authentic story. So you want to look here at interesting experiences that you have had, or you have seen, or you have heard about. Sometimes I get inspired by interesting experience I read about in the newspaper, or I see on the news. So there's lots of things that can start triggering in your mind that are interesting experiences. Travel adventures, your travel adventures, someone else's travel adventures, travel shows on TV, anything that inspires that in you. Witnessed events, personal trauma or illness, daily life. Sometimes writers forget, I find this particularly true in soap operas. There's no daily life there. These people don't go to work. They only go to bed for one reason. There's nothing that is a normal daily life. So we're going to talk about those. So interesting experiences. So the picture that's here is actually a picture that was taken in the bioluminescent bay in Puerto Rico. And was just a fascinating experience. And I thought, I really want to read that into a story. But how do I do that I don't have a story that's set in Puerto Rico. I don't have any reason to have, but I used it as a way for this newlywed couple to almost get to know each other more. The young woman who's the main character in my first Chincoteague book, this is actually, I think, in the second book, after they've had their story, but there's still scenes with them. And she traveled all over the world as a child. Her father was an anthropologist. So she did all kinds of things in all kinds of places. And each one of those affected her in some way, made her the person she is. And so that's kind of coming out in the scene that she's describing to her husband about the time she went to this bay. The focus of the scene isn't really on her, and it really isn't on the experience in the bay. The focus of the scene is on her husband and how watching her and hearing her tell this story affects him. So you never know how you're going to use these, but sometimes when you're listening to someone tell a story, it's their experience. They're telling it, but it affects you in some profound way. And if you can do that with your characters, again, that makes it more authentic. Unique things that you've done and seen. Mountain climbing, what's the world look like from the top of a mountain? Even little things, taking a hike through the woods on a fall day and noting all of those things that have gone on, or that you see and that you hear. Interesting people that you've met. I had an experience, it wasn't even someone I met. We were at a museum, and I don't even remember which museum in DC. The museum, the day, none of that I remember. What I remember was this experience I had watching a film, a little documentary about this Vietnam vet who came home from Vietnam. And the only thing he could do to get him past the struggle, he learned how to blow glass and make things out of glass, and talked about all of these little sculptures he makes and how that brought him out of his depression. And it was just so well done and so beautifully told, and he was so amazing. It completely inspired me. So in one of the Chincoteague books on this big Vietnam celebration that they have on the island every year, I had a similar person with a similar experience come, and he makes drinking glasses, and talked about how the drinking glasses he makes reminds him that you can have a glass that's full or a glass that's empty, and it's all about what you put inside of it. So you never know people you meet, or even like this was just a video of someone I listened to, how that can inspire you. Surprising or harrowing or heartbreaking background stories. Things that you hear that happened to a person in the past and they surprise you, or they make you think, wow, that's quite a story. In one of my books, there's a young woman who's adopted. No big deal. Lots and lots of people get adopted. Her parents are killed in an accident. She decides it's time. She goes through her whole guilt about she never wanted to find her biological parents because her parents were so wonderful. Now's the time to do it. They're gone. She's alone. Searching for her biological parents triggers something in the system, and all of a sudden she's got a hitman after her, and she's on the run. So things that don't seem that big a deal, you can twist and turn and make it into a different experience, as long as you have the authenticity that starts it all off. So travel adventures. This is my vineyard guide, who was so interesting. So where have you been? What have you seen? And I'm going to tell you, if you have never left your hometown, you have never gone outside of the state of Maryland, you have been places, and you have seen things, and you have done things that may inspire you. So think about those places that you've been, and things you've seen, and things you've done. Think about what was special about a certain place. And it could be anywhere in the world, including right down the street. It could have been your best friend's house, that you really felt like that was home to you more than your own home. Why? What was special about that? Can you build a story around that? Or if the story isn't built around that, make that part of the story. What is special about that place? And most importantly, how would you describe it? Because remember, your description, this is we saw in settings, your description is what is going to set the tone for what the reader sees and feels and experiences. You want to look at those kinds of things. Witnessed events. I can't tell you how many books I read in the last 20 years that in some way have some kind of mention of 9/11, because it affected an entire generation of people and actually crossed generations of people. So something big like that, a national crisis, could be something that even if you're not focusing on it, if there's something happening in your book that's reminiscent, my book that just came out yesterday, the young man wants to work on Wall Street. He's from Arkansas. He's never been to New York before. And his hotel is right next to the 9/11 memorial. And so, of course, he visits it. And so the whole scene isn't really about the memorial. It's about what he's feeling as he goes through the memorial and as he witnesses all of this. So those kinds of things can bring real authenticity into your story. Things like car accidents, house fires, break-ins, anything like that. Those can lend authenticity. If you've been in a car accident, you know how that feels. All of a sudden, especially if it's one that you see coming, knowing you can't do anything about it, you can't stop it, what happens to your heartbeat? Is it one of those times where things seem to go in slow motion, or does it happen too fast? All of those experiences that you never thought you might be able to do something with that are things that you can bring into the writing. The birth of a child, whether you're the one giving birth or witnessing the birth or waiting for the birth, all of those come with feelings and emotions and things, sensory things that can be brought into your book. Even think of things like a sporting event, a concert, a cruise. If you're at a sporting event, what's going on around you? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? The pretzels and the hot dogs and the popcorn that are all around. How can you make a scene real? A concert, maybe it's the last concert for this group that is retiring and you're at the last show they're performing. Emotionally, what does that do to you? A cruise, lots and lots of different things. It doesn't even have to be about the cruise, the people you meet, the food you eat, the sights you see. Anything that you have done in your life can become part of the story. Anything. And again, what makes it work is the experience that you bring into it. It's all about description, which I will say, warning, you can let the description take away from the story. So we're going to talk on that in a minute. Personal trauma or illness. So losing a loved one, someone with cancer, we talked about that. It can either be you or someone you know. Somebody's been adopted. Sexual assault, unfortunately, it happens more than anybody ever wants to talk about. And it happens in a lot of books because it leads to other growth of a person or change in life or something. So you can write about those. I always warn, if you're going to write on something that involves personal trauma or illness, those things you really do have to get right. You really do. And that's where it helps to either base on personal experience or on somebody that you know and what they've gone through. Because if someone's reading it and they've gone through it and it's not authentic, they will call you out on it. The other thing too with some of these is, how detailed do you want to get? Again, if you're writing something, say, about sexual assault, somebody could read it and it could be a real trigger for them. So you want to be careful in your writing. Sometimes in the story that may be necessary. You may need to have that description that, just know who your audience is while you're writing it, but try to make it as real as you can. And again, I mentioned a few minutes ago, daily life. Don't forget daily life. Authentic characters in authentic stories lead authentic lives. And a lot of as you do more workshops and all, they say, you don't need to mention every time someone uses the bathroom. You don't need to say, they opened the car door, they put their 2 feet on the ground, they stood up, they closed the door. But you do need to tell what's going on in their life or what's going on around them, and you can use those as part of the scene to move the scene along. If somebody is getting ready to start a new job, and so that morning, his whole focus is on his new job and what he's going to be doing that day, you can have him thinking about it in the shower and then mindlessly turning on the coffee pot and standing and waiting for the coffee while he's thinking about everything that's getting ready to happen. But put those little details in, because none of us just jump from one exciting scene to another without anything else happening. Your reader needs time to process. So there's a difference between a fast-paced novel and a novel that is so much of the fast pace that the reader never has time to take a breath and process what's happening. So those little daily life things can give the reader that little break they need to take a breath, to slow down, to process what has just happened. Spend time with family and friends, your characters. You just spend time with family and friends. Unless you're writing a book about somebody who truly is facing life alone, they have somebody to talk to or go have a cup of coffee with, even if it's just a text conversation, which so many of us have all day long now. Those are things that can kind of slow down the action a little bit, give it some pacing, and it's also a great way to get into your character's mind. So because you don't want to write a book where you're stuck in your character's mind all the time. You want to be able to see what's going on in their mind without it just being a constant reader and character. So somebody, that first day of work was awful. They had a terrible day. So he goes and meets with his best friend after work and just decompresses about it. So that lets you see what's going on. It shows you again what's going on in their mind instead of just telling when they have conversations with friends and family. And it's okay to, again, have them, even if the novel isn't about someone's job. Everyone has a job, somewhere they have to go every day. And so you can weave that into your story. Houses to clean. You could have a whole scene, wouldn't be very exciting, but just as an example, of somebody emptying the dishwasher, thinking about something. Or maybe it's 2 people and they're having an important dialogue, but they're doing some kind of folding the clothes, mundane task. But as long as it's moving it along and there's something happening in the scene, either they're thinking, they're processing, they're talking to somebody. Those are important ways to have an authentic story that moves the scene along. Attorney filing a report or anything like that makes it real. So that is your stories. Thinking about your stories and how to make your stories authentic. Places you've been, things you've done, traveling you've done, past experiences you or somebody else have had, things you've witnessed, and your normal everyday life. All of those things come together to create authentic stories. What I'm going to actually read to you, any questions? I'm going to read you the blurb on the back of the book, because a blurb is really often what is the encapsulation of that story. So you want that to be relatable, and I will tell you, I can write the first draft of an entire novel in about 3 weeks. It doesn't mean it's any good. It doesn't mean that's going to be the book that you end up reading. It probably takes me that long to write the daggone blurb. It's the hardest part of the book to write because it has to be enticing, it has to be authentic, and it has to be a true synopsis or, telling of what the book is going to be about. So it's very difficult to do. But just as an example, it gives you that overall story. As a child, all Courtney ever wanted was to own Riverview Terrace. As an adult, that was the furthest thing from her mind. Following a near-fatal accident and court-approved windfall, Courtney gains a renewed desire to buy her ancestors' colonial-era house, complete with rotting beams and a collapsing roof. The legends of pirate treasure, hidden passageways, and long-concealed family secrets intrigue Courtney. But when a vandal thwarts the renovation process, the house is suddenly much more than she believes she can handle. River Terrace may lead Courtney to her destiny, but will the journey be a road paved with treasure or a dead end that leaves her with nothing but regret? So, this overall look at a story. So what I want you all to do, because you can't sit here and write a whole story for me, what I want you to try to do is think about the different aspects of the story that you would write, and you're going to write me a blurb. You said this is the hardest thing. You're not going to be able to write a full blurb for a real story in 5 minutes. But since we're not actually sitting here today writing an entire novel, it can be something you've made up. The important thing about your blurb is you have to let people know what's going to be happening in the book with the characters. You need to identify the character. You need to identify a set of events or something that's going to happen in the book, and you have to make it real, relatable, and emotional, or nobody's going to read the blurb and then put the book down. So you're going to have 5 minutes to see if you can sketch out some kind of blurb. for you. Anybody think they wrote a good blurb to a book? An interesting blurb? Hold on to them, and if somebody wants to share, you can share, otherwise hold on to them and you see that.
How many words typically is a word, or how long is it?
It's usually between 1 and 2 paragraphs. You want it so that it can obviously fit on the back of the book. And one thing that I started doing with my books is I learned making the blurb a little bigger. Not more, just bigger. But about a paragraph or two. Sometimes you'll have a lead-in on your blurb. For example, on this one, Andy always heard, "You can't go home again." And then sometimes I'll use a quote as a lead-in. This one, "Everyone is a moon and has a dark side, which he never shows to anyone." Mark Twain. And then you go into your blurb. But it has to be enough to spark the reader's interest and get them to want to buy it without giving your story away. So 1 to 2 paragraphs. And a lot of times it depends upon if you're focusing on one main character, the book is really just the story of one person, or if it's a romance or a friendship novel or something where you're focusing on 2. And then you may have a paragraph about each of them. And sometimes then a third, just a sentence or something that brings the stories together. So the most important thing is what you're putting in the blurb. It's a good question. All right, so we're going to go now to authentic scenes, because really this is what we've been looking for. Okay, you've got your characters, you've got your setting, you know pretty much the overall story that you want to tell. Because even with me not doing an outline, not writing it all down, I pretty much know based on that character what the story is that I want to tell, even if I don't know how I'm going to tell it. This is how you tell it, is in your scenes. So your scenes have to be real, they have to be relatable, and they have to be important. And I'll talk about that more. So you want to, again, we've talked about even with the settings, using your senses. It's even more important in your scenes to use your senses. That's one of the ways you make it real. You want to put your reader in the scene. So we've already talked about putting the reader in the setting. This is different. The setting, remember, is where it takes place. That could be the whole story. That could be where a scene takes place. You're always going to set the setting. But in a scene, that's just the opening. Then you have to have what's going to happen in that setting. You, again, want to put your reader in it. The best way to do that is imagine yourself there. Imagine yourself in a setting. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you doing when this is going on? Put yourself into the shoes of your character. whichever point of view it is that scene is coming from. Put yourself in their shoes. And again, I say this a lot, and you'll hear it a lot as you get more into writing and doing workshops and joining groups. Show, don't tell. Make your scenes, your characters, everything. Show the reader what's happening instead of just telling. And I will say, it's not an easy distinction, especially when you're first starting out. It's really not. You might write a scene that you think you have totally shown it, and someone comes back and says, well, you just told me what was happening. You didn't actually show me anything, or you didn't really get me into it. It's a very fine line, and it's something that just as you keep going and you keep looking at scenes and refining your writing, you do build on your experience of that. You want to make your scene relatable. You've done it. You've done what you're going to write about. Someone else has done it. So what? What does that mean to your character? Now, as I said, talking about the bioluminescent bed. So what? What did that do for my scene? Well, it really didn't do anything other than showing through the husband's eyes, his emotions, what he was saying about his wife, how it brought them closer, what it made him think, how it made him think more deeply about her past. Doesn't have to be something big, but it has to be emotional. And remember, emotional can be anything. Emotion is happy, it's sad. Emotion can be exhaustion. Emotion can be feeling nothing. But you always have something going on in your mind, something, no matter what's happening. So you want to bring that in. You want to show in the scene how the others are reacting, not just the character whose POV you're using at that time, whose point of view. You also want to know what's going on around that person. If they're in a restaurant, maybe they're distracted by the clanking of the dishes or the waiters and waitresses calling to the kitchen or something. There's other things going on in that scene. Again, put yourself there and imagine what else would be going on around you. The most important thing, though, is, as I said, so what? Comes down to this. Your scenes really do need to forward the plot and the character development. The only time that's an exception is what we talked about earlier, is that little breather, a little bit of a breather scene. But even that, even those breather scenes should take you somewhere else, even if it's just what the character's thinking. It has to move it on. It has to give character development, and it has to be important to the plot. And you could have several different plot lines going on in a novel. You could have the main plot and several different subplots going on. Maybe it doesn't go to the main plot, but has something to do with the subplot. As long as, I'm sure we've all read books where you get to a certain scene and after a while you're just kind of skimming to see, when is the next thing happening? So you want to make sure that you're letting the reader know as they're going, hey, don't skim this, you're going to need this information later. And you can do that in how they're feeling and how they're reacting and what's going on around them. So make it important. And that really is what I just said about advancing your plot and your character. Why does the reader care about this scene? Why does the reader care that this person is in this restaurant at this time having this conversation? What's the important part? Is it the conversation? Is it what is going on around them? Is it the reaction of the other person? Is it something that the person realizes or sees take place? What is going to be happening? Why does the reader care about this scene? What is it you're trying to get to accomplish in your scene? What is its purpose? Okay. Is it just a breather? If so, again, don't forget to put something in there that tells the reader something. Is it a crucial scene? That there's something in here that happens that's really, really, really important and you need your reader to know. Find a way to make them realize through the characters, hey, you need to know this, it's important. If you're writing a mystery, often those really, really important scenes where there's a clue are done in a very subtle way, so that you're only going to pick up on it if you really pay attention. So you want to make that scene as interesting Again, it doesn't have to be overly detailed, overly described, but interesting. Again, what does it reveal about the character? And how does it move the plot? Are we learning something new about the main character or another character that they're encountering, that they have a relationship with, that they're angry with, anything? What does it reveal about the characters? How does it get us into the next scene? Or how does it get us further down? If it doesn't, then it's either going to be not interesting to your reader, they're going to lose interest, or it's going to leave a loose end. You're going to have this whole scene, and maybe something happens in the scene that you think is a really cool thing to put in there, but later down the line, your reader's going, oh, wait a minute, that big thing happened in that scene back there, and I don't get it. How come that hasn't ever come up again? So you do want to be careful too. If you're making a scene important or making something big happen in it, do it for a reason and come back to it later. Remember that it's all about story development, character development, and introducing or resolving a conflict. So those are the things that you really want to think about as you are writing scenes. Scenes matter. But your whole entire book is made up of nothing but scenes. You go from one scene to another in your book. They matter. This is the shortest part of the presentation, but I feel like it's the most important because it's those scenes that keep your readers interested. It's those scenes that move the story forward. It's those scenes that reveal the critical information you need your readers to know, and each one should build upon the one before it until you always want to build to your climax, build up to it. When you get to that climax, every scene that has come before it should be building up to that point. And that shouldn't be your end. You should have more scenes after that so that the reader has a chance to come down from the climax and know that everything is okay in the end, or not okay, but they need to be led somewhere. So, any questions about scenes? You're going to have 5 minutes to write a scene. You may not be able to write a whole scene in 5 minutes, but again, it's really just to get you thinking and get some ideas moving. So I'm going to read a scene to you. Let's see. Feeling a sudden surge of energy, Alex checked into the hotel and graciously thanked the hotel staff for agreeing to store her massive amount of luggage until her room was ready. She used the lobby bathroom and splashed water on her face. This was her lifelong dream. She was in Italy, the country where artists and musicians from all over the world came to see the works of the masters. Before the death of her father and the virtual loss of her mother, Alex, like most fine arts majors, dreamed of spending her junior year in Florence, learning art and music history from the experts and traveling around Europe to see masterpieces such as the David, the Pietà, the Mona Lisa, sunflowers, and more. Once on her own, she never imagined she'd have the opportunity to leave Baltimore, let alone travel abroad. Out on the sidewalk, Alex closed her eyes and inhaled the smells of the city. She was sure she could identify the very aromas of pizza, pasta, wine, and a host of delicacies she couldn't wait to taste. She let all of her senses soak up the city, the warm sun beating down on her upturned face, the smells of garlic and seafood from the restaurants, the sounds of the Vespas as they raced along beside the cars, the sights of the ancient and modern melded together in a beautiful architectural collage. She took a deep breath and smiled, ready to explore. Turning right, she went just a short distance to the end of the block and stood in awe as she gawked at the giant structure before her. So you can envision a little bit. Having done her homework, she knew that Verona was shocked at the enormity of the round stone arena before her. The entire area around it was a plaza with restaurants, ancient columns and buildings older than anything she'd ever seen. As she walked, Alex took it all in, the ancient ruins, the sense of strong espresso and freshly baked goodness of frappy and buttery cornetti amidst a chatter of a multitude of languages. The aroma of a nearby restaurant pulled her gaze from the arena to the menu displayed on the sideboard, and Alex realized how famished she was. After taking her seat, she quickly found a dish that sounded intriguing thanks to the English translations alongside the Italian descriptions, and she reached for the wine list. She scanned the list until she found just what she wanted. She ordered tagliatelle funghi porcini intimo, tagliatelle pasta with porcini mushrooms and thyme from the menu, and a glass of wine from Belle Uve. Alex was anxious to taste the product, which was now 50% hers. So, and the scene goes on, but you try to, again, it's important if you go somewhere, have pictures that you can look back to. Take notes, use the internet, find those things, know your character, and build upon it. So the scene is not just what's happening, it's what she's feeling, what she's doing, what she's seeing, experiencing. And then, of course, it's going to take us to the next, because as she's sitting there drinking the wine, who comes in? Like the guy from the vineyard delivering a case, she doesn't know, but delivering a case of the wine, which she spots. So that's going to set us up for the next scene. So you guys have 5 minutes to at least try the beginnings of putting together a scene. All right. If someone wants to share their scene, they can. Otherwise, you can take it home and set it aside and build on it from here. But are there any final questions?
Questions about you and your writing?
Sure, absolutely.
You mentioned it briefly, but would you be able to kind of describe your process?
Sure.
And how you tackle a new project or a new idea or things like that?
Absolutely. I have constant ideas. So I actually, in my office, have a wall that is not as big as this, obviously, but a big wall, probably about that size over there. But the whole wall is painted whiteboard paint. And the wall is just covered with my ideas. And for what I have, it's an ongoing series, kind of lots of names and arrows and different things for that. So ideas come from anywhere, and I save them, whatever the idea is. I jot it down so that I can come back to it later. But the way that I begin, I have a new project, I have an idea, I'm going to go ahead and write, always begins with the characters, always. And the main character, and then whatever characters are going to be most important to the storyline. So I pretty much know my characters. I know their background, I know their personalities, their strengths and weaknesses. So I will often do a character sketch, at least of the main character or characters, before I begin, so that I know what this character is dealing with when the book opens. And then I really do let the characters take me from there. And they will. The characters, once I start that opening and figure out where they are now and how the book is going to start, they will just take me all the way through to the end. Sometimes with some very surprising twists and turns. I can know all the background about a character. It doesn't mean that I know what's going to happen to them once the story starts rolling. And I've had some very shocking things happen, and a couple of them where one of my main character ends up getting an illness or disease halfway through the book that I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming, but I see why that was important and where it's going to go. So I really do let my characters surprise me. My husband says, when people hear you say things like that, they probably think you're absolutely nuts. I'm like, writers get it. We know that our characters really do have something to tell us. When I wrote this book, there's a character in her named Marta. And I didn't know background about her other than she was the mother of one of the characters, because nothing else really mattered. I know a little bit of her background. I knew she was the mother of a character. And all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of a scene, and Marta gets this faraway look in her eye. And Alex realizes she has some kind of a secret that she's not telling. And I didn't know what it was. And it took me literally about 5 years before Marta told me her secret. And that's my husband says, you're crazy. But once I knew what it was, then I could see this whole other story developing about what it was that happened with her 36 years ago, and where she is now, and what's going to happen next. to me, it's all about the characters. Sometimes I will be inspired by a story. There will be a storyline or a plot line or something that I'll think, oh, I'd like to write about that. I don't always really know how to start until I know who is going to be in it and how they're going to work together. But that's all very personal. That's what inspires you and how your writing goes. For example, the Ocean Hall down in 7th District, when I knew I was going to write about that, I really did not know what I was going to write. I just knew I wanted it based there. And then I started thinking, well, I watched this route being renovated. I've always been intrigued with it. What if the main character was instead of me putting myself in her shoes, what if she was in my shoes? What if she grew up watching this being renovated and she always wished that that was her house? And so that was kind of the beginning. Once I knew that, then I could develop her and put her into that setting. So that's something you kind of have to figure out on your own. What is your starting point when you're doing a novel? Is it a place? Is it a person? Is it an event? And then figure out how you can develop that idea and then what you need to do to take it to the next step. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Go ahead. You can ask as many as you want, sure.
I was wondering if you could talk about your experience writing your first book and the publishing process and journey and things that you kind of researched and
Sure.
Whichever path that you chose to do that and how that kind of
Okay.
experience was for you.
Sure. I wrote my first book and it went nowhere. And I felt like it was really good. The people who read it felt like it was really good, but it wasn't going anywhere. And I actually gave up. And I forget it. I thought this is what I wanted to do my whole life. It didn't work. And actually what happened was about a few years, 3 or 4 years later, somebody else I knew wrote a book. And when I was very excited for her, very excited, went out, bought the book, and to be very honest with you, it was not good. And I was very frustrated. I said to my husband, if this would be published, I can't love me for published. And he said, because you gave up. Go back and do it again. So I went back and I actually rewrote a lot of the book and reworked it. And then I sent it out again, and that time it got picked up by a publisher. I will say that publishing process was not good. It was a small town press, which most of them are now. Most of them are just very small publishers. I went through 4 editors, and none of them were very good. I wasn't happy with any of the edits. Today, I'm not happy with that book. And I know I still want to go back and revise it. The cover art, and sometimes if I'm doing a talk specifically about that book and that process, I'll bring the cover art. The cover art is horrendous. Some of it looks like comic book covers. Some of the cover art they gave me looks like something that would be on an R.L. Stein book. Like, seriously, this is an adult suspense novel, and you're giving me these horrible covers for it. And finally, it was like the vice president of the company called me and he was like, what is wrong? Why is this tape? And I said, they're horrible. And I sent him all the covers, and he came back and said, hey, you're right, they're horrible. So he and I came up with the cover of the book ourselves. The whole process was not good. My royalties were never paid on time. So eventually, I got an attorney, filed breach of contract, got all my rights back, and I self-published it. Again, I'm not happy with it. And but I have readers who come in and say, oh, I thought your first book was one of the best books ever. I just loved it. Okay, glad you did. That's one of my goals. My thing is, if I go back and I take all the time to sit down and revise it, I'm not writing something else. So that's a really hard thing to decide. But I decided after that that I was going to start self-publishing. When I first started writing, self-publishing was a no-no. You just did not do it. By the time I'd gone through all of this process and was trying to make that decision, now do I send it out to more, what do I do? You had books like The Martian and the whole 50 Shades of Grey series and whatever the Pat Conroy was that he self-published. I mean, you had so many successful self-published books that it kind of became more of a mainstream thing to do. And so that's what I did. I have actually talked to other publishers. I had somebody who I had a long conversation with one day, and he said to me, I'm going to be very honest with you, as a small press, I can't do any more for you than what you're already doing for yourself. I think you should just keep self-publishing. He said, I'll take you, but I think that I'm not going to be able to do more for you. You know, nowadays, they don't do marketing for you. They don't bring in a publicist. And really, if you read a lot of the books, they're not any more well edited. You know, so there's a lot that doesn't happen anymore at the publisher level that used to happen. And there's a lot of published authors. I know several published authors who have maybe a series that they publish with a certain publisher, and they want to come out with a new series that they'll self-publish. So they'll stay with their publisher, but then they self-publish. Well, they've already got a whole network, they've got a newsletter, they've got all of the publicists. They can do that and sell just as many of their self-published as they sell of the publisher one because they're established. But they're finding you can do it on your own timeline. If you write a book, it's going to take you a minimum of 12 months from the time it gets accepted by the publisher to the time it shows up on the shelf. Minimum of 9 months, and usually it's longer. So with self-publishing, you can write a book and have it on the bookstore shelf. I mean, theoretically, you could have it on there in a week. It's probably not going to be in your best interest to do so. But by the time you have done everything that needs to be done with that book, you can go ahead and self-publish it. So you can set your own release date, your own goals, what you want to have done when. You only share your royalties with your printer and distributor. I have found that I like being self-published. And I kind of, as I said, talked to publishers and gone back and forth, and I'm like, kind of like the way that I'm doing it now. So, and again, that's just a choice that you have to make. There are a lot of people who are like, I will not write unless I have a real publisher in New York, and this is the way it's going to go. And a lot of these publishers in New York are closing. And I know my editor graduated from college, a new editor, my editor retired, and she can't get a job anywhere. She did an internship with a publisher, and she still can't get a job because they're no longer hiring new people to do the editing. And as I say, they don't use publicists anymore. They don't use marketing people anymore. So they're really downsizing, and a lot of them are really doing less and less with new authors, and it's hard. So self-publishing is hard. Self-publishing, you've got to be your own accountant and make sure that your taxes are paid twice a year, and do all of your own marketing. You make your own trailers. But I have a professional editor. I hire proofreaders. I hire a professional graphic designer. So I try to do everything that a publisher would do for me. I try to do it the right way. But I will say that the selling and the marketing and all that, that's the hardest part about self-publishing. You get distribution is easy. Just because you have the distribution doesn't mean your books are going to show up in every bookstore. So, and I usually tell people when I'm doing different things, and they say, how can I get your books? Are you on Amazon? Yes, I'm on Amazon, but if you go to your bookstore and you ask them to get my books, they have access to my books through my distributor. They can get my books. So, and I try to push that, first of all, because those bookstores are so important. Our small town bookstores and libraries, they're so important. More important than Amazon. But also to let people know that they're out there, they're accessible. And you can get them. So, what else?
I think that's those are the big ones. What's your like production normally for producing books? Do you get one a year?
I typically do 2 a year. I mean, I know some authors who do more than that, and they have a whole office with staff, and they don't have to do all of the other stuff that goes along with it. 2 a year seems to be good for me as far as being able to write it, edit it, build up the marketing for the release, get it out there, and then it's not like I do all that and then I do yet another one. I mean, I already have another book typically in the works by the time that one is released. But 2 a year works for me. And I think probably the majority of authors these days, it's about 2 a year. A lot of authors say nowadays, well, if you don't have at least 2 books a year, if not more, then nobody will read you. And my experience is if you have readers who write your books, they will read you. Look at Diana Gabaldon, who has a book come out every 10 years. She's not losing readers. So it's whatever you can do to put out the piece of work that you are happy with. So, and I did want to mention everything we talked about today. If you want to look at authors who really do all of this right, you mentioned J.K. Rowling. Obviously, she has all of this down pat. Diana Gabaldon also has all of this. Her books are just absolutely amazing. The characterization, the scenes, the settings, just amazing. Harlan Coben is another one who does a lot of like crime kind of stuff. He really is one that I love, and I'm so excited when he has a book come out because he just does it right. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of writers who write well, and I read just about everything I get my hands on. But those kind of pop into my mind as the ones that you're talking about, real, authentic, can't get enough of. I would say they're probably my top 3. So if you're looking to read something that makes all of this a little bit more real and obvious, those are the ones I recommend. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for coming and for your questions and participation. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And anyone would like books, I do have books with me.